Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Vitality Coaches Wellbeing Program. My name is Jamie, and I'm part of the coaching team at Vitality, where my role is Head of Health Engagement. And you may notice that there's a slight change in the program today. So the conversation today is all about the power of exercise for women's health. Now, I think the first thing that I need to say is that obviously I'm presenting and hosting this session. And of course, I'm a male, but I'm a male with a background in physiology and in sport physiology. I've worked with and trained with lots of women. And actually, I think that this is a topic that I'm super passionate about and I care about a lot because I think that the information that's out there and available is so valuable. And I genuinely believe it to be life-changing. So hopefully that people will stick with me and bear with me through this one as I try and kind of guide as much as possible. And I just want to support as much as I possibly can, because I think that what we can cover here today are things that everyone should know as a standard. And I think it's something that we all need to be starting to talk about. So just because it's me doesn't mean that other people can't start to have these conversations as well. And hopefully along the way, I'll be answering lots of your questions as well. We've got a huge amount to cover, so I'll make sure that I cover it as best as I possibly can. But in terms of the plan for the session, we're going to look at kind of 5 key areas. So first and foremost, just a really simple start in terms of what the current exercise guidelines are. So I appreciate that wherever you're coming at this from, you're going to be in different places, and that's entirely fine. And that's the first thing that we need to say, is that there's no comparison here. There are guidelines, but if you're not able to achieve those guidelines, you need to scale things back a little bit. Then second to that, I guess it's the fundamentals in terms of the physiological and the psychological benefits of exercise. And again, going back to my kind of physiology roots, if you like, I really enjoy explaining to people. Obviously, we've probably heard about the benefits of exercise, but we're not sure we actually understand the science behind it. But then the focus and the main part of the session comes in the next 3 areas. And that's all about the kind of like understanding our bodies a little bit better. So looking at the menstrual cycle and how that can affect our training. And what I really care about actually in this session is that I think that there's a perception that the menstrual cycle and hormones can make it more difficult for people to train and perform, whereas actually working with your hormones can be a real strength and can make a real difference and actually improve your training. So it's about understanding the right times when to push and maybe when you need to adjust and adapt your training to fit with that. Again, looking at the pre-registered questions that we've had beforehand, lots of questions around PCOS and menopause. So we're going to cover that relatively briefly. And actually, the focus for this session isn't on types of exercise or what you need to be doing, but there are going to be pieces of content on that throughout as well. And also, I'm going to guide you to a couple of different places too. So if you've got a phone on you, make sure that you have that handy, because there's going to be a couple of QR codes along the way, which will be really beneficial. So in terms of the current exercise guidelines, again, just a really basic place to start, and you might already know this, but in terms of what the government guidelines suggest is that for everyone across the UK, we should be aiming for 150 minutes of moderate activity every single week, broken down evenly across the course of the week. And then we should be doing an extra 2 strength sessions across the course of a week as well. So that doesn't necessarily incorporate into the 150 minutes, it's 2 additional sessions. Alternatively, you can do 75 minutes vigorous exercise. And again, the key with this one is that your sessions may be a little bit shorter, but you're spreading them out evenly across the week. So whether it's 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, anything more that you want to do, it's making sure that you've got an equal and consistent frequency to that. And then the final part is really simple, around reducing the sedentary time. So avoiding sitting and laying for prolonged periods, and making sure that you're keeping the accumulative effect of exercise going as well. So whether that be walking, cycling, yoga, Pilates, stretches, just keeping the body moving really nicely. I think it's key at this point to probably explain like what moderate, vigorous and strengthening looks like, because again, like that could be different for so many people. So for moderate activity, we're talking walking, leisurely cycling, maybe some enjoyable dancing, hiking, gardening, anything that's just getting your heart rate up a little bit, but not too intense. Vigorous activity, that obviously looks a little bit more like your running styles, your swimmings, team sports, aerobics, gymnastics, martial arts, anything that you would enjoy really, but it's just about increasing your heart rate above that 70% limit really. And then strengthening, like I said, it's not about doing these on their own, it's about doing them as part of your routine as well. So it might be that you do some specific strength-based training, and we're going to come on to that actually. I think it's a key focus for women in training. It could be yoga and Pilates, so something that maybe is just using your own body weight, but also it can be everyday activities like carrying heavy bags or lifting children, or just generally being active around the house. So it doesn't have to be dedicated weights. It can be using your own body or using the environment around you. But I think that the main thing is that actually we don't undervalue that strengthening activity, because there's so many benefits to that I'm not sure everyone necessarily appreciates. But like I said, again, a key point for me is that you've got to meet people where they are. So if at the moment you're only doing 30 minutes of activity every week, to then go from 30 to 150 is probably going to be way too much. And I think the thing that we like to promote at Vitality, and something that I certainly live by as consistently, is that doing things more often than not is the most important thing. So I would never want anyone to do something super intense once a week. I would say there's much more benefit of consistently doing equal chunks on a regular occasion. And that way you'll probably start to enjoy the exercise a little bit more, but also it means that you're going to be able to sustain it longer term. And that's where you see the real results. So wherever you are right now, maybe just have a little check-in with that, and then make sure that you're maybe progressing a little bit more to maybe reach that 150 minutes target. But if you're not near it right now, it doesn't mean it has to be an immediate goal. So in terms of the physiological and psychological benefits of exercise, I'm sure people have heard of these sorts of things before, but in terms of, reducing risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke, I'm sure this is not new to people, but I guess what might be new is like, why, or like, how does exercise do that? And I think there's lots of physiological benefits to exercise, of course, but one of them mainly being that you've got improved coronary blood flow to the heart, and you're going to have less likelihood of those blockages, and your heart's going to be a little bit stronger because it's working. It's like any other muscle. It will become stronger, it will become more efficient, and the chances are, as you get later in life, you're going to keep that healthy heart, and that's going to consistently pump out your blood. And if you're doing regular exercise, actually your heart is like any other muscle. It does need to be worked on, and that's very closely linked to cholesterol. So again, with cholesterol, I'm sure people have heard of it, but there's maybe some myths around it, maybe, in terms of there's good cholesterol, you've got bad cholesterol. And what I would say is, actually, I find this fascinating, so I hope that you do as well. There isn't actually any difference in the chemical makeup of cholesterol. The difference between what makes cholesterol good or bad is the proteins that carry it. So you've got your HDL cholesterol and your LDL cholesterol. So if you've heard of that before, I'm sure it's not new to you. The way that I remember it, H equals healthy, and then the LDL is maybe less healthy. And what I mean about the difference between the two is that HDL stands for high density lipoprotein, and LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. So the HDLs and LDLs are carrier proteins that carry the cholesterol around your body. So the difference between the good and the bad is the direction in which they travel. So the HDL, the healthy protein, is taking the cholesterol from the blood, taking it back to the liver, and that's where it gets recycled. Your body's able to deal with it. But the LDL cholesterol is secreted from the liver into the blood, and that's maybe where you get those blockages, those buildups of plaques, those fatty deposits, and that again can go into the one above and increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke. So they're all interconnected, obviously, but I think it's just important that people maybe understand a little bit more about like the differences between the two. In terms of bone health, and I've called it peripheral musculoskeletal fitness, which is a way too much of a mouthful. But as you get older, your joint health, your bone health, your muscular health does start to deteriorate. So after the age of about 30, you can expect that you might lose about 1 to 2% of your bone mineral density every single year, unless you're combating that through doing exercise and resistance training in particular. So osteoporosis is what we'd probably term that. And with that becomes a reduction in the bone mineral density. And that means if there are falls, the chances of breaks and fractures, you're going to be a little bit more fragile, are increased. So you want to make sure that you're doing lots of resistance training to keep the weight going through those bones, keeping them nice and strong. On the other side of the muscles, you've got something called sarcopenia, which is just muscle wastage. And again, after the age of 30 and with hormonal changes, you can expect that potentially. But again, it doesn't mean that we need to give into it. It just means that you maybe need to focus on your resistance training just a little bit more. In terms of the last two, obviously body composition at Vitality, we use BMI as a measure, but what we'll always come back to is actually what's the makeup of your body. So you can have a high BMI, but you may be more muscular. So again, I just want people to become aware of like their body shape, their body type, and you're working from those baselines. And then finally, you've got stress management, increased self-esteem, and mental well-being. So all of the psychological effects. I've kept these really, really broad because I think they're different for different people. So For example, there is a hormone called norepinephrine, and that can improve your cognitive function, maybe your mood. I'm sure you've all heard of endorphins, which make you kind of feel happy and energized. But at the same time with that, I'm very, very conscious that maybe some people don't get those things from exercise. So again, it's about understanding where you're at and making sure that you're doing the right things for you. Exercise needs to be enjoyable, and hopefully it will make you feel better. It might make you feel a little bit more confident. You might meet social groups of people. So I don't think that we should just look at the physiological. I think it's really important to look at the psychological, because once again, that is the key to consistency, and that's really the key to results. So on that note, if you're our Vitality member, I mentioned some QR codes coming up. If you'd like to book your Vitality health check, you'll cover lots of those things within that. So if you've got a phone out now and you haven't booked your Vitality health check, obviously you can earn your points as well at the same time. But it's a great way for you to understand your blood pressure, your blood glucose, your cholesterol, your height, weight, and BMI, and then speak to a professional about those results as well. So I think it's a really beneficial thing for most people to do as just a general check-in. So we're going to get into the kind of, I guess, the more specific to women's health. And this is the area that I really hope that helps people, because there's so much unknown there. And it's something that the more work I've done in this space, the more that I've realized that there's a gap there. And I think that there's an opportunity here for us to kind of really tackle this head on. And I hope it's quite empowering for people, because I believe that the opportunities that come off this knowledge are incredible. So we're going to look at the menstrual cycle properly as the majority, and understanding the hormones and the processes and the stages of that initially. So the two hormones that are quite critical within the menstrual cycle, again, this may not be new to you, but it's good to just cover the basics, is estrogen and progesterone. And every woman can expect and experience hundreds of different hormonal fluctuations over the menstrual cycle. And in terms of what hormones are, they're kind of the body's chemical messenger system. So they tell the cells and the organs of the body what they need to do. So they are essential, and they're something that we do live with, but women maybe experience them just a little bit more than men, where the main hormone for men is probably testosterone. So in terms of the two hormones specifically related to the menstrual cycle, you've got estrogen, which is critical in puberty and development of the body. And it also plays a role in the women's menstrual cycle, which we'll come to a little bit in a second. But estrogen also has a role outside of the reproductive system, and it affects sort of bone health, skin, hair, the brain, and cholesterol at the same time. So an essential hormone. But again, it's really important to understand how that affects your body and at different stages throughout a cycle as well. On the other side, you have progesterone, and that's produced in the ovaries and is released at the second half of a woman's menstrual cycle after the ovulation phase. And its main role really is to prepare the womb lining for the implantation of an embryo. If the egg is not fertilized, then the progesterone level will fall dramatically, and that's what leads to menstruation. So again, just really important to understand those basics. And again, just in terms of like the stages or the understanding, every woman can expect completely different cycles. So everyone is individual. And that's the first thing I have to say, is that this information may be entirely relevant to you or it may not be. Everyone has different experiences. So don't mean that if it isn't textbook for you, doesn't mean there's anything wrong necessarily. But again, a message that I would give throughout this, if you're unsure in any way at all, then do speak to a GP or a trained professional or someone that you can trust in this space. But simply, during each menstrual cycle, female hormone levels rise and fall as part of a feedback mechanism that regulates the release of an egg from the ovaries. On average, again, there's no such thing really as an average, but a menstrual cycle lasts around 28 days, but the range often goes between sort of 24 days and 35 days. And again, on average a year, women may expect to have around 9 cycles, but again, there are variations outside of that. And outside of pregnancy, women will continue to have regular periods during their adult lives until they reach the early stages of menopause, which is known as perimenopause as well. So again, it's something that will affect women in different ways, and it doesn't mean that all women will experience periods in the same way. Again, any concerns, questions, anything like that, do make sure that you check in with specialists as well. So in terms of the stage of the menstrual cycle, they're kind of broken down into 4 separate phases. You've got the period phase lasting anywhere between sort of 5 to 8 days, but again, it could be more or less than that. The second phase is the follicular phase, which lasts anywhere from sort of days 5 to 14. The third phase would be the luteal phase, which can go from days 15 to 21-ish. And then the final phase would be the premenstrual phase, which lasts from day 22 to 28. And I think it's about understanding your unique cycle. So again, at this point, if you're someone that does track your cycle, there are apps out there. I'd strongly recommend the Genis app. I do actually have a QR code for that later. I think that the way that they cycle map is brilliant. And I think it's hugely important to understand where you are, because I think what that does is it gives you freedom to kind of give yourself permission to be a certain way on a certain day. It reduces the pressure because you understand your body just a little bit better. So if you're not tracking or cycling, then I think it's probably something that would be beneficial for a lot of people, and it just helps you understand that. But if we now move on to the exercise piece specifically, I think that we're really, really poor at individualizing training, exercise, and fitness for different people. And it goes way beyond just women. It goes beyond into different age groups, different abilities. There's so much variance. But in terms of women and fitness and training and the differences between men and women, there is a huge, huge gap in the data. So it's called, I'd call it the kind of gender data gap. And actually, only 4% of all sports science research is based on just female athletes. So if you bear that in mind, how can we possibly know what the best thing to do for female athletes is when only 4% is based on sole female athletes themselves? And I've just brought this up because I think it's important to show, again, like we will come into these phases just a little bit more later on. But actually, if you look at the female hormone levels, they're varying quite a lot across the course of the month in each of those stages that we detailed above. Whereas the male hormones are very much quite consistent in terms of you've got testosterone, which is the main hormone, which is going to affect your body's processes. But within that, it might rise a little bit in the morning, probably drop a little bit in the evening, but it doesn't actually affect things too much throughout the day. And again, what I think is really key to this is we're not saying that because women experience more hormonal changes, that's a negative, because actually what I'll explain later is where there's huge, huge positives to it. And like this goes way beyond just exercise as well, because the vast majority of data that we have is based upon the male body. That sort of proxy affects everything from kind of like seatbelts to smartphones, you know, like men's hormones do follow a relatively stable pattern, whereas women have a 28, 29-day cycle of fluctuations, and you need to appreciate those things along the way. So again, like, I think it's really, really interesting that we can have this topic and this conversation because it will affect the way that we need to work and understand our bodies, and it's about working with, not against, is the key. So in terms of exercise and the menstrual cycle, I want to ask people watching the question right now, like, have you ever experienced this, and have you ever had to reflect on yourself about this? Like, 1 week you can power through a workout, you absolutely smash it, you feel like anything's possible, and the next week you feel like you're doing exactly the same workout and it feels like the hardest thing in the world. And that can be so demoralizing. Like, I find that really challenging to help people with, because it's a difficult situation to just be like, oh, it's my hormones that cause that. So it's about understanding where you are in your cycle, and by mapping out your sessions to match with where you are in your cycle, you may be able to work out more consistently, again, which is key, but also experience more body positivity. And then naturally the gains will come from that, because you're able to track and train in the same way and make sure that they're fully aligned, so that you're at the times when you can utilize your absolute best you are. And maybe when times you're not up for that, you're still able to perform at a perfect level for what it is that your session is trying to get you to achieve. So what we're going to do now is go through each phase and understand a little bit about what's happening, how you might feel, and then also how to use your exercise to make that fit. So if we start with the first phase of the period phase, generally, like, symptoms may be associated with this. Again, everyone very different, but things like cramps, fatigue, headaches, mood swings, backache. And what's happening is once your womb lining begins to shred, it's possible to experience a large range of uncomfortable symptoms. And actually 84% of people do experience some sort of cramps and aches during this phase of the menstrual cycle. So what's happening? Well, I'm sure you've all heard it said before. It's said too often, I think, that actually women can be accused even of being hormonal. It's actually the complete opposite at that point. It's actually very little to do with the hormones. As you can see, your estrogen and progesterone levels are actually relatively stable. But there's a group of chemicals called prostaglandins, and they are creating those undesirable feelings, really. So prostaglandins are essential to trigger the muscles in the uterus to contract, but too much can be too intense and it can cause cramps elsewhere in your body. So again, it's trying to target one place in your body, but it might not be able to specifically do that, and that can branch out into other areas and again be a little bit more uncomfortable for you. So if you're experiencing those things, what's the right thing to do with your exercise and your training? And you really have to get smart with this. Like, it's not about trying to push through these things. It may be in this period, for the 5 to 8 days or however long you necessarily need to do, you need to look after that. So you might look to do things like cramp relieving yoga or some stretching, which might boost your energy and get the muscles working and the blood flowing, or Pilates, some more strength work. Like we said at the start, you need those 2 dedicated strength sessions a week. I do Pilates regularly and I find it amazing, not only for my strength, but the way that my posture, the way that I'm performing when I do my sports. And then finally, like when you've got your short and sharp bursts of energy, it's about utilizing them. So you might not want to be doing prolonged exercise necessarily during this phase, but you might want to make sure that when in those intense moments, you're able to perform and deliver. Again, if you experience none of those things, then maybe it's a chance that you just continue your training as usual. It's about when you are in those difficult situations and you don't know what to do. Hopefully, these ways of exercising will give you a little bit more ideas about that. Moving on to this sort of second phase of the cycle, anywhere from days 5 to 14-ish, is the follicular phase. And I would say this phase is like an incredible phase. I think everything in your body happens and it's all for a reason. It's not to mean one is better than the other, but this is the phase where you might feel really confident. And there's actually a lot of research that has suggested that women may walk and talk slightly differently through this phase, and they can actually, there's a lot of science around the gains that can be made here. So how you might feel as your estrogen levels rise to a peak is that you might feel a little bit more motivated, a bit more social, outgoing, confident even, and actually this might be an opportunity for you to use those feelings to challenge problems or reach for your PBs. And what I find fascinating about this is, if you look at the cycle here, we'll come on to the luteal phase next, is that imagine you're an Olympic athlete or you're someone, everyday athlete, who's just wanting to perform at their absolute best. If you've got an event or something that you're working towards and it happens at this point, you're going to be ready to tackle anything that comes your way. And again, that doesn't mean to say that if it's any other phase, you're not likely to, but the chances are you can use these feelings to really go and boost your motivation, boost your performance, and value the positives in them, because I think too many people talk about the challenges, but actually what about the opportunities there are as well? In terms of the science of what's happening, well, estrogen levels, as you can see, rapidly rise, and that's as you prepare for ovulation. You may also experience very minimal spikes in kind of testosterone, but as a woman, you don't generally have too much testosterone. So when you do have little bursts of it, probably its presence might be quite noticeable. In terms of exercise during this phase, then, it showed that kind of stacking and strength training and resistance training during that period is probably where you're going to make the most benefit. So women can build up to 15% more lean muscle mass during that phase than any other phase. So it's time to push, really, I think, is the key message. And again, like, as a man, there's no time in my month when I'm able to push 15% more than I usually would. So it's an incredible ability that women have, and it's a strength that should be celebrated. And I think, you know, with this, you might want to then look at higher intensity interval sessions or strength sessions or HIIT training or circuit training, or maybe you want to do it socially because you're feeling like you want those people around you. But I think it's not only just about the physical, enjoying those benefits, but also the psychological of utilizing that motivation, pushing yourself. And again, it may go beyond exercise into other areas of your life, but I think it's an important time to really appreciate where you've got the extra potential to push yourself and enjoy that and maximize it, really. So following the follicular phase, you then come into the luteal phase. And during this phase is when your progesterone levels rise and then your estrogen levels may fall a little bit. And during this phase, again, some people may experience feeling a little bit more chilled, a little bit more relaxed. And although a sense of calm is obviously amazing, I think that that can also come with feeling like you're less motivated to train or go harder. And I think I've spoken to many athletes that find that quite frustrating. But rather than feeling guilty about that, I think the key is to tune into those feelings and change the pace at which you work, and appreciate the way that your hormones might make you able to actually go a little bit longer, but just less intense. So I'll come to that in a second, but the presence of progesterone, really, that signals a distinct change of pace. And again, it's about working with that. And although you may be able to push harder during the follicular phase, your endurance capacity actually increases quite a significant amount during the luteal phase. So your metabolism may also shift, preferring to use fat as fuel rather than carbohydrates. So your body uses fuel in a hierarchical order, and the easiest and most accessible way for it to use fuel as energy is through carbohydrates. So 1 gram of carbohydrate provides around 4 calories of energy. When you go through this phase and your body may lean on fats a little bit more, your body per gram of fat yields about 9 calories worth of energy. So it's actually giving you much more energy, but it's less intense bursts. So the effect that you may feel is that during comfortable sort of steady state exercise, around like 50 to 70% of your maximum effort, you might feel really, really good during those phases. So again, like if I go back to that analogy about like Olympic athletes, if you're a weightlifter and your event falls in your follicular phase where you've got to do short, intense bursts of energy, that's probably going to work really well for you. On the other side of that, if you're a marathon runner and that falls in your luteal phase or an endurance athlete of any form, then it's obviously going to benefit you as well. So it's just really, really interesting to understand how the different phases can affect your body. And again, it's not about being negative or working against them. And for me, like if anyone is a personal trainer out there, I think we've got a lot of work to do, because I think that the questions that you should ask people before a session, and I hope that we can get to that stage, is, do you know where you're at in your cycle? Because if the answer is you're in your luteal phase, then maybe it's not the right time to be pushing for your personal best and adding on extra weight or making you run faster. There'll be a time and a place for that. When there is, it's just like any form of periodizing training. So I think it's an interesting way to look at things. So during this phase, you want to be doing probably longer, slower, steady state work. And that's again where you can build that cardiovascular base, and then the strength elements can come around that, the other forms of the phases. So then if we come to the final phase, which is the premenstrual phase, anywhere from sort of days 22 to 28. And this one, again, I find it's funny the way that people speak about things when they're almost entirely incorrect. So contrary to what's said, like anxiety, maybe symptoms of tearfulness, fatigue, irritability, headaches, all the other symptoms that you may experience that other people would put down to hormones, it's actually the complete opposite. It's actually when the hormones are dropping. So as you can see, both progesterone and estrogen have significantly dropped, and that's probably what's giving those experiences. I think this phase is maybe one that's a little bit more difficult to manage, because 1 minute you can have feelings of super high emotion and energy, the next you may feel emotional. So again, like it's very, very different for very different people, but a little bit harder to predict, I guess. And in terms of like the science behind that, again, estrogen affects serotonin, which you may have heard of, which is kind of like a happy hormone. And progesterone has an anti-anxiety effect. So with both of those things reducing maybe simultaneously, it's not uncommon to experience kind of like withdrawal effects and potentially less desirable symptoms. But again, working with that, if you suffer from those symptoms or even other things like bloating or discomfort around the abdomen sort of area, gentle exercises that massage the core can help alleviate those issues. So if you might want to focus on core exercises or yoga flows or Pilates and things like that, that's one side that might help you depending on your symptoms. If you're feeling a little bit anxious or irritable, or like you need to burn off some energy, then maybe that's when you go for your higher energy HIIT training or strength workouts or interval running. But the key is movement in this phase. I would say there's no pressure on intensity, focus, or regularity, but it's about moving as much as possible and as little as possible consistently throughout the course of your day. So less specific advice, I guess, during this phase, because it could be so many different things, but the key is just consistent movement. So when you maybe don't feel like doing something, the best thing that you can do is push yourself to move a little bit more, whether that looks like yoga, stretching, a run, a walk, just sitting up for a little bit, like getting your body moving is quite key to this phase. And again, hopefully that means that you're working alongside things and you're not frustrated if you're not able to do maybe what you were the previous week. So just to summarize all those, because I appreciate there's a lot there. In the period phase, maybe that's where you look for like cramp relieving sessions, things like yoga, stretching, Pilates, short and sharp, intense interval sort of style training. During the follicular phase, that's when the higher intensity work comes in. So maybe it's strength training, maybe it's endurance training, but doing it in much shorter, sharper bursts. I think that's where it's time to push and enjoy the extra motivation that you may feel. In the luteal phase, that's probably where you're going to go for more steady state endurance style exercise, maybe heart rate of around 50 to 70%, but doing any exercise maybe for a slightly prolonged period. And then at the premenstrual phase, gentle exercises if you are experiencing cramps or digestive issues, maybe some focused yoga, again, Pilates, similar to the period phase. But also, if you need that boost of endorphins and energy, maybe try doing some shorter, sharper bursts of more exercise. Again, though, the final thing on that section is just movement as much as possible, continuing to make sure that your body is working through those processes. So I mentioned at the start about the Genis app being amazing for cycle mapping in terms of, yeah, it will give you a great understanding where you're at, but it also matches the exercises that you should be doing into those considerations. So I think that that's something that everyone can do. But if you needed a little bit of help with that, then scanning this QR code will take you through to that. And hopefully, again, it will transform the way that you train to not only help you improve in terms of your results, but enjoy the process, potentially come a little bit less frustrated as well, if that is what you're experiencing. So the next two sessions are probably a little bit more specific and unique to certain people. But again, looking at the pre-registered questions that we had, I'm not going to go into huge detail on these. I think it's important that you do seek your kind of healthcare providers' expertise because every situation is different. But it is something that lots of women may experience, or if you're a man or a woman, you may be able to support other people that have experienced these sorts of things. So if we start with polycystic ovary symptoms, which I'm going to call PCOS from now on. Essentially, its cause is quite unknown, but there's a lot of research to suggest it's a hormonal imbalance caused by the ovaries creating an unusually high level of androgens, which are a type of hormone. And a woman can get PCOS anytime really after puberty. Most people will probably be diagnosed in their 20s to 30s, and up to 15% of women will experience PCOS, so not uncommon at all. In terms of the symptoms of PCOS, again, super varied, but generally things like irregular periods, abdominal pain, hair growth, obesity, acne, darkening of the skin, cysts, thinning of the hair, and infertility on occasions as well. But again, like every situation is different. That's why I don't want to be prescriptive at all with this. None of this content is advice giving. It's more about raising the awareness. And if you resonate with any of these things, it's about going to the right people to check where you go from that. But treatments for this can include sort of like medication. It may be lifestyle changes as well, again, depending on your symptoms, or it could be a combination of both of the things. So there's lots of different things that you can do. But in terms of exercise and PCOS, again, it's about working with your body, not against it. So in terms of like where the value of exercise and PCOS can come in, is that exercise is known as a hormetic stressor. And that means that if you do it in the right way, in the right context, it can be super beneficial for your health, and it can help to lower things like stress and inflammation on the body. However, on the other side of that, when exercise is done in the wrong context or at the wrong intensity, such as if you're not eating properly, or you haven't had enough rest, or when your body is under a lot of stress or attack from illnesses and things like that, it can have the opposite effect and actually exacerbate stress hormones and make the inflammation worse, which can negatively then affect your PCOS symptoms. So self-awareness is the main thing I would say with exercise and PCOS. So work smarter, not harder. Don't always feel like you have to be pushing for more. On the days where you feel good, maximize that. On the days when maybe you don't feel so good, that's when you need to bring it back a little bit. Similarly, with all of the themes throughout this session, do incorporate some strength training. The optimal would probably be, again, 2 sessions per week, but again, it just helps your body adapt and it's able to support its muscular function just as much as it is its internal systems and things like that. Outside of training as well, I think it's important that you focus on prioritizing your rest and restoration as well, because I think that doesn't need to be done through sitting or sleeping or anything like that. It could be through gentle movements. So yoga, Pilates, foam rolling, stretching routines, just making sure that you're nourishing your body both from the inside and the outside. And then finally, again, like making sure that you focus on the types of exercise that you really enjoy, because it's an opportunity to take time to explore different things. Consistency is the key, which is the theme throughout this. I know I'm saying the same things over and over, but it's about like understanding when your body's good to push, what to push it with, and maybe when it's not so feeling so good, what to do to keep it ticking over. So when the time comes, you can really enjoy those moments as well. Again, another unique topic, which I know affects so many, and it's something, again, that men and women need to discuss and be aware of, is menopause and the changes that happen in the body at that period of people's lives. So when you go into perimenopause, which is the stage just before kind of like going into the menopause phase, you may experience a a shift from like the cycles that you've known. So we've detailed the 4-phase cycle. Things can get a little bit more chaotic, and naturally what's happening at that stage is that your estrogen and progesterone levels are decreasing. So the hormone alterations that your body's experience can present themselves in a variety of ways, and that can go from anywhere from kind of like anxiety to night sweats to gaining weight, but also none of them. Like everyone is different. And I think this conversation that everyone's having with October being, World Menopause Day and things like that, is that if you have no symptoms at all, that's also completely fine. But if you do have symptoms, it's about understanding them. So again, like, what's the right things to do during menopause? Because it's such a challenging time. Like physically, it puts extra stress on your body. So your body's already going to be working overtime. Practically, for lots of people, when they reach the menopause age, wherever that sits for them, their life is probably going to have several different demands. It may be careers, it may be families, it may be priorities, but there's lots of things going on at once, which make it a challenging time in itself. Emotionally, obviously, symptoms can increase the anxiety level, can cause things like brain fog and different challenges. And personally as well, going into that menopause period of life, sometimes people don't prioritize themselves because they feel others are reliant on them, which again presents real challenges. So in terms of exercise and menopause, like again, seek your professional's advice, make sure you are safe to exercise. And if you are exercising, these are kind of like the 5 things that I would really say are important to think about. The first one is warming up. Like we said, like your body is more prone to stress during that phase, and that means that you might be more likely to be at risk of injury during perimenopause. So ensuring at least a 10-minute warm up prior to exercise, that will prepare both the muscles, but also the nervous system and the neuromuscular system about to be presenting with the challenge of whatever exercise it is that you're doing. I know we should be warming up anyway and all throughout our lives, but I think at this phase in particular, it just primes the body to get ready into that extra stress state. Second to that, I think really think about hydration with the body again in that stress state, and maybe its functions are working a little bit harder than usual, which will burn a little bit more energy. So just be extra conscious of hydration and make sure that you're getting the right amount of fuel into your body, both in terms of nutrition and the fluid that you're taking on board. In terms of strength training, I know it's been a current theme, but as you get older, like we said earlier, the muscle mass can decrease by around 3 to 8% per decade over the age of 30. Again, though, it's very difficult for us to not just look at that and kind of give up, but if you are doing the right things, you can reduce that amount. So with increased risk of injury, strength training is important to protect the joints and the bones from fractures and sprains and things like that. And actually, there is a lot of research to suggest that women with more muscle mass than fat mass can reduce hot flushes by up to 70%. So some of the effects that you may have felt through menopause or perimenopause can be reduced by increasing your muscle mass and just making sure that you're incorporating that strength training. Fourth one is really, really important, I think, in terms of incorporating pelvic floor exercises. When the estrogen levels decline, women may experience atrophy around their pelvic floor, which is kind of like muscle wastage, which can impact like bladder control and result in a number of like uncomfortable side effects. And ultimately, all of those things can also lead to reduced confidence as well when exercising. So having to focus a little bit more on pelvic exercises not only helps you day-to-day life, but it also helps you with that longer on-term exercise as well. And then finally, the exercising of your brain and your body. So brain fog is a common symptom experienced by so many. If you're able to connect sort of cognitive mental skills with physical activity, you may see reduced impact on your clarity of thought. You may feel like you're able to see things a little bit more clearer. And I think brain fog, again, is one of those things that is so unique to people. People experience it in different ways and certain things work. Like maybe you need to do a little bit more cognitive work. On the other side of that, you need a little bit more rest. So again, exercising and using your brain at the same time could be a great way to connect those two things. And again, explore it, have some fun with it. But hopefully those 5 things, keeping them in mind with your exercise, will keep you feeling motivated and confident and seeing still positive results, even if there are any challenges that you're experiencing. So gone through a lot there around kind of like understanding your body, about working with your body, but I'll try and now move on to like how to actually improve your fitness as part of your kind of like pursuit of getting better. So I'm just going to focus on 2 areas. There's a lot here. I'm going to guide you to some other places as well. And ultimately, the internet is incredible for helping you to improve your cardiovascular fitness and your strength. So wherever you're watching this from, make sure that you utilize those channels as well. But I'm going to start with like improving on your cardiovascular fitness. So if you want someone that wants to improve your heart health, whether that's through endurance exercise or doing dancing or anything that is going to get your heart rate up, how would you actually structure that across the course of a week? So I've broken it down into 5 simple stages in terms of using your heart rate as a measure for how to improve your cardiovascular fitness. So the first thing that I would suggest anyone do at this point is that they calculate their maximum heart rate. The most simple way to do that is just a calculation of taking the number 220 minus your age. When you do that, if you imagine that you're 50 years old, 220 minus your age, checking my maths, is around 170. It's definitely 170. So 170 beats per minute is your rough maximum heart rate. So then what we do with that number is super important, because then what we can do is we can break down that heart rate into different zones. And zones are what we'd probably categorize the intensity of exercise as. So zone 1 would be really quite low level intensity exercise, potentially walking or barely even walking actually. Zone 2, you're starting to focus a little bit more on that endurance, but again, it's sort of walking, very slow jogging, cycling, swimming, dancing, gardening, anything that you do day to day. It's more than rest, of course, but it's still not too intense. You should be able to hold a conversation. Zone 3 is where you get your like traditional like endurance training. So it's between sort of 70 and 80% of your heart rate maximum. Zone 4 is where you're starting to push things just a little bit more, working at about an 8 out of 10 intensity in this. And again, that's 80 to 90%. And then your zone 5 is absolute max. Can't have a conversation with anyone. Can't really last very long either, just 100% intensity. So utilizing that is really important, because for me, if you take that 170 number and you work out your zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, you can understand what intensity maybe you need to be working at to suit the goals that you want to achieve. So what I've done here is look at across the course of a week. And ultimately, what you want to do is make sure that you're working your heart in different ways. One time you may want to look at just some steady state, longer endurance, a little less intense work. Second thing that is important to do is with your heart is work it a little bit harder at that 70 to 80% range, but for a shorter period of time, so it's not so prolonged. And then finally, you really got to work your heart in the highway as well. So you've got to test it. It's like a car. You've got to rev its engine every now and again to make sure that it's working across all the different spectrums of intensity. Again, like if you've experienced any issues with your heart or anything like that, make sure you're taking that advice on. This advice here is based on kind of like a general population level and making sure that you're doing all the right things across the course of a week. So for example, I put a little program here together. On a Monday, you may do your steady state endurance exercise. That's the session of the week that will probably be the longest in duration, but it's probably a lower intensity, to about a 6 out of 10 effort. And again, if you look at the zones, you're probably looking at 2, maybe even reaching into 3. So if you take your 170 max number, you may be looking at 65 to 75% of that. That's your target heart rate. And again, if you're a Vitality member, make sure you're tracking on that. You can get your points for doing that activity. Tuesday is a rest day or recovery or strength training, anything you want to do differently. On a Wednesday, you may look at that higher tempo work. So that's a 7 or 8 out of 10 effort. And again, maybe around intensity level 4-ish. So 80% of your maximum heart rate. Again, like this is going to be maybe 20 minutes in duration or 30 minutes in duration. But I say that based on no knowledge of where you're at currently. So if you do exercise regularly throughout the week, maybe 20 to 30 minutes. If you're very new to exercise, maybe this is where you utilize sort of blocks of intense exercise interspersed with those rest periods. And then the final stage on, say, a Friday or whenever you want to do, just if you're doing 3 sessions a week, is where you do your super high intensity. So you're working at maximum levels here. But again, you're having interspersed with big rest periods. So it's about working for really short durations at maximum intensity, spiking that heart rate, letting it come back down, interspersing with rest, and then pushing it up again. So maybe your intensity is 9 out of 10 when you're working, really pushing that zone 5. So you're pushing up towards the 170 max rate, but it's not going to be so intense and you're not going to be doing it too consistently. So you're making sure you're getting adequate recovery within each. And then Saturday, Sunday, again, you can structure this in any way, but around 3 sessions per week. The key really is to make sure you're working your heart across different zones, not just doing the same thing every single time, making sure that you're varying that intensity. What's way better than that, though, and all of what I've just said, is that we actually delivered a workshop all about how to improve your cardiovascular fitness. And that will take you through the complete journey of understanding your body, your cardiovascular system, and more specifically, how to train with that. So if you are interested in doing that, that session there will give you all of the information that you possibly need to know. What I've just done there is touch the surface on it. So again, hopefully you've had time to scan that and go check out that session. On the other side, we've got strength training. Again, I'm keeping this really brief, but I just think it's important to maybe show people some of the things you can do. Again, strength training is something that potentially women haven't done traditionally, and I completely understand the reasons why that might be. Everyone's different. It goes anywhere from kind of like the gym settings not being suitable, going back to that gender data gap, maybe around body image and the perception that weights training may make you look a little bit bulkier and less feminine, but there's so many different reasons and ways to do strength training that will make it work for you and still fit within your goals. So there's a real basic structure. What you'd look to do across the course of the week is some form of upper body pulling exercise. You're pulling the world towards you, if you like. Some sort of upper body pushing exercise, so pushing away from you. And then you've got a lower body pull and a lower body push. So I've given some examples here. If you wanted to do a pull exercise with some weights, you'd maybe use a row, which is pulling a weight towards your midline of your body. Second to that, you may do a pull up, where again, you're on a bar or using some sort of equipment to help you with that. Again, like go and explore these things yourselves. And hopefully I'm just giving some ideas. An upper body push could be an example of a press up where there's several variations so you can meet you wherever you are, or a shoulder press. Again, you may have a weight pushing away from your body. And then in terms of lower body pull, this is activating your hamstrings, so the muscles at the back of your legs. So things like glute bridges, working the muscles all in the posterior chain, or hip extensions. And then you've got that lower body push, so your traditional exercises, things like squats or step ups and things like that. In terms of like how to structure your strength training, really, again, like when you're looking at upper, lower, push, pull, that may be your structure for a session. So you can do one exercise, which is upper pull, one exercise, which is lower pull, one exercise, which is upper push, one exercise, which is lower push. And you may do 3 to 4 sets of each of those. So sets would be the number of times that you're going to do those separate exercises. 3 to 4 is kind of a standard number, but then when you look at the repetitions, is the number of times you're going to do those exercises within that set. So again, like what's really important to is to think about what your goal is. If your goal is to build strength and just be stronger, the number of repetitions that you do within a set is going to be way less, but the weight that you're going to lift is going to be way more. So you're pushing yourself to that maximum level, and you may only be able to do 1 to 6 repetitions during that because you're going to be going to failure. When you're doing that sort of training, it's really important to make sure that you utilize enough rest. So you're going to need at least 2 minutes rest for those sessions, because you're really not only fatiguing the muscles, but also the neuromuscular system as well. You want adequate recovery so that when you come to going again, you're ready to perform. If your goal was to increase the size of your muscles, so hypertrophy is what we'd usually call that, then the number of repetitions that you want to do is going from anywhere from about 6 up to 12. And again, you want to select the weight that makes you feel like when you get to that limit of whatever number of repetitions you're doing, you feel like you may be able to do one more, but you probably couldn't do any more than that. So you need to be stressing your muscles in the right way, but again, making sure they're not overreaching and at risk of injury. If that's your goal and you want to increase your muscular size, you're going to reduce the rest a little bit, because you do need to put that pressure on the muscles. So anywhere between 1 minute and 1.5 minutes. And then finally, if endurance is your goal, you want to be able to make your muscles work longer for better consistency, maybe less weight, then you want to really increase your repetitions. So above 12 repetitions, maybe 12 to 18 would be the range that you'd look at. And you're going to reduce that rest as well. So it's more consistent work, lighter weight. So you can probably see here, the more weight that you do, the less repetitions, the more rest. Makes it sound easier, but obviously you're lifting far more weight. When you come into the endurance, the weight really drops down, the number of repetitions increase, but the rest period decreases to make sure that you're exacerbating that load at the same time. So again, it's a really basic structure for how to use your strength training. Upper, lower, push, pull, strength, size, endurance, pick whatever it is you're doing. That can set the structure for your work, and then you pick the exercises that suit you best to achieve your goal and what you find enjoyable, and obviously making sure that you can do it in a sustainable way as well. So I hope that has helped a little bit. And in terms of, again, I've always got a QR code for you. There's a really interesting video that Johnny did, who's our head of exercise and physical activity, all about resistance training for women and understanding the ways in which you can do it a little bit more. So I'd really encourage you to guide towards that. And that will probably support you in terms of like the more specifics about how to train, what sort of exercises to do as well. Again, I think the purpose of this session for me was about raising the awareness of how to work with your bodies. Understanding that then gives you the tools and empowers you to go out and find the things that work for you best. So I really hope it has achieved that. I really appreciate everyone listening. Hopefully you're stuck with me throughout this session. Again, like, it's something that I really am passionate about, because I feel like the potential to support people is huge, and I don't think it's spoken about enough. And I think that actually what we've hopefully done here today is celebrated the potential and the possibilities, and made sure that we can help people work with their bodies, so that whether or not they're feeling 10 out of 10, they can absolutely smash session, or if they're not, they're going to be doing the right things that are going to support them with that as well. So yeah, I hope it's been of use to you. Please do let me know what you thought of this session in the feedback form, which will pop up at the end of the session. I'd love to have some interesting conversations with people. I'd love you to go and share this sort of content, again, if anyone that you feel can help with that. And again, like, if you want to find more about content, please do head to our YouTube channel, where we've got a full catalogue there that will hopefully support you in lots of different ways, whether it's physical, mental, nutritional, social, even financial. There's a whole host of content on there. So thank you so much for your time and for listening. I hope you have a great day. Enjoy whatever it is that you're doing, and I'm sure that we'll catch up again really, really soon as well.